All right. Well, we're joined now by Ryan Harlan. Ryan covers the Oregon State Beavers for Beavers Edge, an On3 affiliate. Ryan, thanks for being on the show, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Always down to talk Oregon State.
Love it. And yeah, we're very thankful to have your perspective on the Oregon State Beavers. Give the listeners just a little bit of background. How long have you covered the team? What's your relation to Oregon State? And how are you where you are today?
So I've been covering the team now. Fall camp will make it 5 years officially. I started my junior year of undergrad, and my goal was never really to write at first, and I just kind of fell in love with it and just kept working at it, kept getting better and better, and I kind of stuck with it since. So my first sort of jump into sports writing was I wrote for the Daily Barometer, the student paper here on campus. And immediately my first beat was the football team. So I got dropped in right away. I remember my first presser was when Trent Bray was named the interim defensive coordinator in 2021. So that was kind of a tall task for somebody that had never really done a lot of sports journalism prior to then. And really, I just kind of have been around since. So I've grown close with a few players on the football team, gotten to see them play. Good friends of mine. One of them is in the CFL right now, Josh Green. Got to shout out my boy. He was the first really kind of connection I had made on the team, and has been a good friend ever since. And then I've been a student here my entire time at Oregon State. So I've kind of had that perspective of, getting to be, around the team, not only from the student side of things, but also too from the reporter. So getting to kind of split both and getting to build those connections with those athletes outside of the sport that they play. Because at the end of the day, they're just like you and I. They're trying to figure out this whole, at least for my case, they were trying to figure out this whole college thing. And also to getting to figure out what comes next for them while playing the sport that they love to play and love to be around. And for myself, that's why I enjoy it. And that's why I love being around Corvallis, Oregon State athletics. It's a special place. And it's great that I've had the privilege to do this now for 5 years.
Well, you picked a heck of a time to attend Oregon State when it comes to just the athletic situation. Not a lot of stability the last couple of years and a lot of just moving parts as the Pac-12 dissolves. And now, not this season, but next season, it'll be coming back in some new form. Give us just a little insight of what that's been like for people on the ground in Corvallis to watch all that play out.
So I actually started covering realignment my first year, the first summer I was around in Corvallis. So that was the move when UCLA and USC announced that they were leaving for the Big Ten. And I kind of was waiting around for a little bit to see if there was anything new, kind of anything that would come up. It was kind of just radio silence for the most part after that. And then I was editor of the Barometer during the summer when everything kind of hit the fan. And I remember I had a whole plan ready to go for fall camp coverage that year, where DJU was our starting quarterback that year. It was okay, my plan is set, ready to go. I know exactly what I'm doing. When August rolls around, I'm right there at the practice fields every single day that I can be there. And I remember kind of hearing through, social media and everything that it looked like Oregon and Washington might leave, Arizona State might leave, Utah might leave. This kind of whole it may happen, it may not. And then it looked like things were going to resolve itself. All the remaining 8 schools were going to sign that grant of rights. And then first day of fall camp, that's when it all goes down. And we're all trying to figure out in that moment, what's going to happen next with all these moves and everything. And I remember we asked Smith about it, and Jonathan Smith, former Oregon State head coach, now at Michigan State, didn't really have much of a comment on it. And it was more of, I think, just processing in the moment of hey, this is a really big move for us on the other side of it, in addition to kind of these historical rivalries that we've had over hundreds of years. And it would be foolish to say that the players weren't, like paying attention to that stuff. They definitely were, and it definitely kind of showed afterwards, following off season when Smith officially left, and then you're kind of in this weird spot, not knowing what your schedule is going to be for next season. And I don't blame a lot of those guys for transferring. Like in that situation, like I get it, like in NIL in this day and age of college athletics, like you want to be playing the highest competition possible and get your name out there and go on to the next level, go to the NFL draft. I know, NFL teams will find you no matter where you're at, but at the same time, though, to the school that you play for also carries some weight in addition to your own draft stock and what you can show out on the field. And so I think for everybody around here, and I know when I was covering it, I had a lot of sleepless nights. It's just kind of figuring out like what's next. Like that's basically it. It was like drinking from a fire hose. There was no kind of stop to it. And I think when the schedule kind of came around in 2024 of like, hey, this is what it's going to be. It's like, okay, we know it's certain in front of us and we know what we can deal with and we know what we can manage at this point in time. It's just making the most out of the situation that we have and being able to work with that. And then we figure out what happens next year and in the next season. So I think it was a lot of just playing the landscape as it was and kind of just being this kind of pseudo independent team, still affiliated with the Pac-12, but you're not really playing Pac-12 teams other than Washington State. So that's kind of where I would say that like this kind of it was like more of a, you figure it out as you go rather than trying to think too much ahead and trying to plan too much into the future. And I know, at least from like a student perspective, we were all aware of it. Like we were just kind of wondering, like does this team go to a new conference? Do we rebuild the Pac-12? Like what does Oregon State do? And that was something there where I think a lot of fans and then also students were kind of wondering, where was that? And I think from a kind of what Washington State and Oregon State have done in terms of rebuilding, I think it's you get the best that you can out of the Mountain West, and then also to finding your next best options and like, okay, you get that 8th football team in Texas State. Now it's a matter of how do you flesh out the rest of the schools in your conference for not only just football but for the other sports as well too, because I know football at the end of the day is your cash cow. It's going to be the big thing that you're going to be judged upon as a university. But at the same time, though, it's you have to also consider not only the football side of things, but the other sports as well that are not as revenue generating compared to football.
Yeah, especially baseball at a place like Oregon State, right? Where that
Yep.
program is just out of nowhere about 20 years ago, just became a national power and have stayed that way since. So yeah, I think when I think of Oregon State and Washington State, I think they have done a fantastic job making lemonade out of lemons the last couple of years and just weathering the storm for these weird independent, not independent alliance with the Mountain West. Now we're taking the Mountain West, right? It's been an up and down ride, and I don't envy you guys that cover it every single day because I'm sure it's crazy. Transitioning to on the field, though, for 2025, you look at what you saw from the Beavers last year, right? Trent Bray takes over. You mentioned Jonathan Smith leaving his alma mater to go to Michigan State and coach in the Big Ten. Trent Bray now elevated from defensive coordinator to head coach, and it was kind of an up and down year last year, right? A 5-7 finish. You saw some sparks on the offense. The defense, kind of surprisingly, I thought, had a few holes, but I'm sure there's a ton of transition on that side of the ball. How do you grade his tenure so far early on?
I would say for a first-time head coach and the situation that he was dropped in, with kind of the turnover in the roster, bringing in a bunch of new coaches as well, and kind of playing this schedule the way that it was. I would say probably that first year, probably like a solid C plus. If I had to give it like a letter grade, there was some good, but also too, there are some things where there are some games that this team should have won, and then some games where this team should have lost as well too. I mean, you mentioned kind of the start. There's those flashes. I mean, a 4-1 start. It was kind of I think that start was a little bit fool's gold to a degree, and I think it was more of, you kind of were skating by a little bit in some of those early games that you played. I mean, you played Idaho State, you played San Diego State in a game that was a lot closer than it was on paper. Um, and then also too, you played Purdue, one of the worst Power Four teams last season as well, and you lose to Oregon, obviously, but like that offense as well was one where I know that's not Bray's specialty at all, but it was definitely one where it matched one of their worst years in 2017 in terms of production. I mean, QBs only threw both Ben Goldbranson and Giovanni McCoy through 7 touchdowns combined. It was really atrocious numbers on the field. I mean, McCoy was 3 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, barely over 1,000 yards in terms of passing. He was more effective as a runner compared to being in the pocket. And in terms of that side of things, that was really one of the, I would say, kind of the downsides from that year. But also, I think it was just the personnel that you had available too. And then on the defensive side, which is Bray's specialty, Bray that year was going to be a little more hands off and try to be a little more of a CEO in being a head coach and not necessarily being a play caller. And Keith Hayward did a good job for the most part, but I think a combination of injuries, personnel, scheme fit, what these guys were doing, I think it was asking a little too much of them and not necessarily playing aggressive defense. It seemed to be more of a like, okay, we're not going to let you, throw over the top of us. We're going to, give you, kind of 10 yards or so, give you like a little bit of room to complete, a pass or anything like that. It was never an aggressive style defense that I think we're, as Oregon State fans and journalists are used to seeing. It's a very aggressive style from Trent Bray. Like, I know when Bray fully took over and had his opportunity to put his hands on the defense, all the players basically said that, like, it just allows us to just go and just play and not really worry about anything else. And I think that's probably maybe a little bit of like a position style kind of mentality. Like Keith Hayward, former defensive back for the Beavers, Trent Bray, former linebacker. I think a little more of an intensity in that side of things was kind of what was missing from the defense. It just didn't look like Bray's defense at all. It kind of looked a little bit similar to the defensive coordinator before Bray, Tim Tebesar, where it just looked a little more soft coverage, a little more less attack style kind of mentality. And I think that was also part of it as well, too, that kind of contributed to that. So there were some good moments. There were some not so good moments. I mean, the highlight of that year arguably was the game against Wazoo, where like I remember going in that game. That was my last game as a student reporter, and I was so not excited for that game, just kind of how everything had played beforehand. But I promised myself, I was like, hey, this is technically your senior night. Like, you should go. You're gonna regret it if you don't. And I'm like, I was so glad I went. That ended up being the highlight of the year, I think, by far. And that was right after kind of this team kind of had found their momentum a little bit. And I think that was more of a, send everybody off of the final home game on the right note. And, like that's where I think things kind of started to improve a little bit better, where you saw a little more cohesiveness together, not only from the offensive side of the ball, but the defensive side of the ball. And I think a lot of the adversity that both of these sides of the Oregon State football team face is, I think, only beneficial for them going forward. I mean, a lot of young guys on the defense got a lot of time playing. I mean, Andy Alfieri was a tight end last year. He's transitioned fully over to outside linebacker. Exodus Ayers, a true freshman corner, wasn't expected to play last year or play much. He played a lot of snaps. That is only really beneficial for his development going forward. And I think too, as well. Like that gave Bray a year to be like, hey, like this is what I want. This is what I saw was an issue from last season, and this is what I want to improve on, work on for next year. And I think these guys know that. They knew that last year was not a representation of what they're able to put out there on that field, and they're hungry. They're ready to go out there, start of the season, and show like, hey, this is what Oregon State football is all about.
Well, yeah, you mentioned that Washington State game being the high water mark, and I'm always a believer, especially in first years, if you can find that one game maybe that you weren't supposed to win, but you overperformed and you found a way, and even better when it's a rivalry game of the last two surviving Pac-12 members, right? And 5-7 always feels way better than 4-8 when you're looking back and trying to build the positive case for the next year. So that was a massive win, not just for last season, but for building the continuity for the future, like you're talking about. Shifting over to the offensive side of the ball for this year, as we talk a little bit more about 2025, the big portal addition was Malik Murphy. He's a well-traveled quarterback at this point in his career. California kid, spent some time down here in Texas, went out to Duke and was the starter last year, led Duke to 9 wins last season before coming back home to the West Coast. And you also bring back a really talented running back in Anthony Hankerson, who had a nice season despite all of the challenges that you mentioned on that side of the ball last year. So when you look at those two guys as kind of the headline players, in my mind, at least from a national perspective, what do you see as kind of the identity of this offense and what they're trying to do heading into 2025?
The identity of this offense, any Oregon State offense, is always going to be running the ball. I mean, that's always the bread and butter of really good Oregon State teams, having a good stable of running backs as well behind them. I know 2022, that was very much a year where they leaned heavily on the run game, and that was the year that Damian Martinez came in, where kind of took over the job as a true freshman and did really well. And that's something where I think this team is going to kind of stick to that as well. In addition to being a little more, I would say, well-rounded than they were last year. I think they were over reliant too much on the run game, and I think that was more maybe just Gundy not really comfortable with the personnel that he had and the plays that he had available. So I think they were a little too one-dimensional at times, but also at the same time, though, I think, you have a quarterback there in Malik Murphy who can make every throw possible, and also too can run the ball as well. Let's not forget that either. Dude is talented in both, not just throwing the ball down the field, but also running. But I know first day of spring, he was like, yeah, like, I don't really like to do that. I don't really like to run a lot. I don't want to get hit. But at the same time, though, like there was a couple times I've seen him run where I'm like, okay, like, if needed in a game, like, yeah, he can get you, a first down easily with his legs. But I think that's going to be more of Jabari Johnson kind of handling those duties than anything else. Malik's backup. But like, yeah, the excitement around him, I think, is really palpable. Like, I know every single guy is like happy to have him in here. It's a very good locker room with him in there. And I know like Malik has transitioned really well over. I mean, that familiarity with Ryan Gunderson, having recruited him at UCLA, was a really big deal. And then initially, before he went to Duke, he did take a visit to Oregon State. So that first visit, I think, a little bit helped him, with his decision to come here. And the transition's been pretty smooth too, even with him picking up the playbook through all of spring. And I think he's going to be even better than what he was in spring ball and in fall camp. And really, like, those are the two guys that I think are going to drive this offense. And then even two in the passing game, can't forget Trent Walker, Darius Clemens as well. Taz Reddix is another guy that I'm really high on, who I think will have a breakout year this year. So they got a good stable of weapons in the receiver room, the tight end room, and in the running back room, to where I think Malik can succeed and get to kind of where, this team wants to be at. And also in terms of like, more of like the passing game, I think it's going to be much more improved than it was from this past season by far. I mean, like I had mentioned earlier about McCoy's stats, it's like I think it's going to be something a little bit more improved than that, and especially the familiarity that both Gundy and Malik have with each other, like in talking after every single play in practice and kind of picking each other's brains a little bit and being like, hey, look, what'd you see out there, and all that. Like that's something there where I think this is going to be a much more improved offense by far, and it all starts with bringing in a guy like Malik who can make every throw on that field. It's just really the only thing I want to see from him going into fall camp is just the timing and getting that ball to the receivers as well. Like I know there was a couple of overthrows that he had in practice, but it's like we're talking about practice. Like we're not talking about the game, we're talking about practice, and that's something where like that just comes with timing. That just comes with, working after practice, getting those down, routes on air kind of stuff. And I think by far this is going to be a much more improved passing attack, but the bread and butter of this team is going to be running the ball. I mean, that's exactly what Oregon State's known for. And I think you're going to see still a lot of that, but also too, much more, I would say, down the field and a lot more explosive plays and more of a fun offense, as Ryan Gunderson promised a year ago in spring. So I think a little more of that you'll see this year.
What on the other side of the ball, what gives you confidence that there will be a bounce back year for that defense?
Well, I would say the biggest thing, Trent Bray calling defensive plays again. I mean, it's worked before with other coaches across college football, Kirby Smart being one of them. So I think too, with Bray getting to have his hands fully on the defense again, I think that's something to where I see a lot of confidence in this unit to bounce back after last season. And even you got a lot more depth along the defensive line. I know a lot of injuries were there for this group last year. So it was kind of really hard to get pressure on opposing quarterbacks. I mean, if not only San Jose State's backup is able to stand in the pocket for more than 5 seconds, like that's a problem. So that's something there where they've improved that. They went out and into the transfer portal and improved that position group. I mean, you bring back Nico Taylor as well for another year with the JUCO eligibility ruling. And in addition to depth at the linebacker spot as well. And then in the secondary, that room is really deep as well. And I think a guy that will probably stand out and make a big impact this year, not only Exodus Ayers, but also Trey Glasper as well. True freshman, came in spring, immediately started working up his way with the ones right away and started covering guys like Trent Walker, Darius Clemens, and kept up stride for stride with a lot of those receivers as well. So the dude is good. Is good. Best way I can explain it. So he's a guy that I'm really excited on. I'm really high on as well. So there's a lot more depth at all 3 levels of this defense. Bray back at the helm, calling defensive plays again. And you can really feel it too, the energy that defense has with Bray in practice rather than last season where it was kind of new. It was kind of different. You're still trying to figure everything out, but it's a lot more, lot more intense, a lot more high energy. And I mean, that's kind of the guy that Bray is. Like I've seen this man run up and down the field after loose balls with his group, just loud energy as well. Like I've never seen him really walk anywhere. I've always seen him run every single like press conference and everything like that. Like he's very much that kind of like football guy. And I remember like a former Oregon State player, Akili Arnold. I asked him because I was doing a story that year, and I asked him, I was like, so if you give Trent Bray a helmet and shoulder pads, do you think you go out there on the open field and try to make a tackle? And he was like, I don't know if he makes that tackle, but he'll definitely try. So that's kind of where like this team, I think, adopts that kind of personality that Bray has, and especially that unit as well, the defensive unit. So I think a lot of guys are just like really excited to get to the start of the season and play with that intensity. And I expect that to be the case first week of fall camp when that opens up.
I love it, man. I love that. I love that insight that you bring from seeing that at practice every day. And just, yeah, I think that anytime a team can take on that personality of a coach, especially when it's a defensive coach like that, it's going to pay wonders. for that team going forward. Last thing before we get you out of here, Ryan, let's just do a quick scan of the schedule this year. Vegas has the over/under at 6.5. It's an independent schedule, to put it bluntly. You do have the home and home with Washington State, but there's not really like a true conference portion to break down, of course. Road trips to Lubbock, Texas, and Eugene for the rivalry game against Oregon. Another road trip that is really interesting to me is the one to Appalachian State there in October. What stands out to you about the schedule, and what do you see as the final record prediction this year?
I would take the over personally on what Vegas is saying for the schedule this year. I mean, it's a pretty solid schedule for the most part. It's pretty front loaded with your tough teams at the start of the first 4 weeks, but then it kind of softens up a little bit after probably Appalachian State, getting into Wake Forest, Lafayette, Wazoo, Sam Houston, Tulsa, and then Wazoo to close things out. So I think it's a pretty competitive schedule. And also, like, you get week 2, a former Mountain West school, now Pac-12 opponent in Fresno State. So I really think that, like, this is still a pretty competitive schedule that could get you into the college football playoff if, kind of cards go your way and, the season goes how you want it to go. But at the same time, though, too, it's like, we can sit here and talk about what games they should win, what they might lose. But at the end of the day, it's like, you don't know what this team is yet until you get through fall camp and then you put on the pads and you get out there week 1. That's always the mentality I have with it. But that's just kind of how I approach the season, kind of week by week. But I think this is a pretty competitive schedule for the most part. And I can see them, winning 9-10 games out of this if, things kind of go according to plan and kind of everything kind of falls in their favor. Really, the only two I would say tough losses would probably be maybe Texas Tech potentially on the road, and then Oregon at Eugene at Autzen. Those are probably the only two that I could see them really losing for the most part. The rest is pretty winnable for the most part, but it's a matter of, I think going out there playing, you don't know until you get into the start of the season, and those games where, it should be a must win. It's like those always could be an upset. I mean, any given Saturday. That's always how I kind of approach it. And I really do think that, like, 10 wins is definitely achievable, but, like, if I had to put a kind of prediction, I'd say like 9-3, respectfully, like, a definite big improvement from 2024 to that is probably where I kind of have it right now before, we kind of get into the weeds of everything with fall camp and kind of how position battles play out and how, certain guys are going to stack on that 2 deep roster. But that's kind of where I would have them a little bit. I think it's pretty competitive, and also to soft schedule at the end to kind of, boost up those numbers a little bit. But I think that, like, those are really the only two I have penciled in as losses right now for the most part that are, like, I can definitely see that happening, but you never know. Like, and at the end of the day, like, it could always be that, hey, the Beavers might win those two. So those are ones where, I kind of look at it as, like, you just take it week by week and you kind of see how the cards play out for you in every single game. And if Beavers do definitely make it to a bowl game, I will definitely try to go. So that's definitely the plan there.
I love it, man. Yeah, there's a lot of winnable games on that schedule. A lot of very interesting matchups. I know. I don't know if you've done the research on maybe teams that they've never played before. It seems like there's a lot of potential first-time matchups on that schedule too. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. Ryan, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for your in-depth knowledge on the Beaver program. Before you leave here, tell the folks where they can find your work and where they can follow you.
Yeah, no, appreciate you having me on. You can find my work over on beaversedge.com. And then also, too, I post all my stories and stuff and updates and things like that, all things Oregon State, on Twitter at Ryan_Harlan7. So that's where you can find not only stories, but also, too, just any kind of news updates as well. So not only just football, but basketball, baseball, and anything Oregon State related. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, Ryan. We'd love to have you back soon to talk more Oregon State.
I appreciate having me on. Thank you.